The Hampton Bay crime. The bodies were found in a water-filled bay near Windhoek one Sunday afternoon in June 1913 by two farmers walking by the bay. When they saw a dark mass floating on the water, they first thought it was a prank involving a fake corpse thrown into the water. When they realized it was something frightening, they dragged the floating mass to the shore using a tree trunk, and upon discovering it contained two bodies bound together with a window cord, they reported it to the police. The mass contained two human bodies, each dressed in clothing in a state of deterioration. Upon arrival, the police officers informed us he had no reports of missing children from the nearby areas. It soon became apparent that the facial features of the bodies were obscured, prompting the local doctor to reiterate his earlier view that an autopsy would be futile. The bodies were of unknown individuals who had died under mysterious circumstances, and the police would not be able to investigate further without identifying them. We started with the clothing as the first point of investigation for the unidentified bodies. I knew that the design of the clothing, the way it was cut, its condition, sewing style, and tailor's or seller's mark could provide significant information about the individual's identities, social status, residence, habits, and possibly the movements of the victims. Often, clothing can lead investigations to more specific identifications. Initially, we did not expect much from this case because the fabric had deteriorated from prolonged exposure to water. When we removed the clothing from the bodies, we discovered that both were wearing similar attire, from shirts and socks to knee garters and shoes, and the clothing was of low quality, indicating that the victims were poor. Little John remarked, "This doesn't reveal anything new." I agreed, but pointed out a printed label on one of the shirts indicating a place in desert. 5. This label was the most significant detail we had from the clothing. I looked at the bodies, but they were in a state of complete decay. When a body is left in water for an extended period, its distinctive features disappear. Fat turns into something closer to mud and fat, and remains solidified. However, in this case, the decomposition was not entirely complete. Little John asked me, "How long do you think they were in the water?" I said, "Not more than 2 years, possibly 18 months, but no less." The standard procedure for an autopsy on an unidentified body begins with determining whether the body is human, then identifying the sex and age. In this case, the fat preserved the body's shapes well, but their external appearance did not clearly determine their sex. Initially, I thought the first body was female, but I found no female organs, and upon cutting the thighs, I found the organ closer to male. The second body was easily identified as the same sex, which was apparent from the clothing. By measuring the length of the bodies, I determined that the first was 3 feet 6½ inches tall, and the second was 3 feet, which seemed appropriate for children aged 6 to 7 and for years. I examined the older child and found evidence indicating he was 6 years old, with middle teeth erupted, which could add another year. Then I examined his bone length and concluded with some certainty that he was 6 or 7 years old at the time of death. The other child had all milk teeth, indicating he was between 2 and 6 years old. The appearance of his first molar and bone length suggested he was between 3 and 4 years old. The children had been shaved, but there were some small patches of brown hair left on their backs. There was a wound on the scalp of the older child, but there were no skull fractures, and I could not determine if the wound occurred before or after death. Internal examination revealed the condition of all organs, including the stomach. I took some samples and analyzed them at the Edinburgh Institute. The stomach contained green peas, potatoes, barley, radishes, and cabbage, typical of Scottish stew. The autopsy preserved this evidence in its state for a long time, and its significance was that it helped determine the time of death. Since the vegetables were fresh, I inferred that they were consumed in late summer or early autumn of 1911, and they had their last meal an hour before death. This meant they lived nearby. I visited the site where the bodies were found again, which was isolated and about a mile east of Windhoek and a quarter mile north of the main Edinburgh Road, a road lined with trees and shrubs submerged in water, and the area seemed entirely deserted. Little John asked me how I thought the bodies arrived at this location, and I said that the victims must have been walking with their killer in this secluded area, not knowing that the killer had such intentions. Thus, the killer was likely one of their relatives, possibly a parent. So we had information to present to the police. We informed them about the type of the victims, their ages, heights, hair color, and the circumstances leading up to their deaths, including what they had eaten last. their poverty, and the likely accomplice. After an extensive investigation, the police discovered that 2 children had gone missing from a nearby area in November 1911, one aged 7 and the other 4, with brown hair. The police learned that their father, a widower, had previously been imprisoned for failing to care for them. His name was Patrick Higgins. He had served 6 years in India as a soldier in the Scottish Regiment. Upon returning home, he obtained a job as a bricklayer in Winchurg and married a local woman, having his first son, William, in 1904, and the second, John, in 1907. His wife died in 1910, and the children received assistance from the Women's Charity for the Poor in Fife, and were transferred to the Dysart Orphanage in 1911. The parish requested Higgins to pay for their accommodation, which he refused, resulting in a 2-month prison sentence. He was released on August 24th to retrieve his children from the orphanage and return them to Winchurg. He immediately placed them with a widow named Elizabeth Haynes, whom he knew from childhood. He would sometimes stay at a local inn or at the brick factory where he worked, where he cooked his food in a crude manner, using a shovel for frying and a bucket as a pot. Higgins earned 24 shillings a week, mostly spent on alcohol. Despite promising Mrs. Haynes to pay for the children's care, he never gave her a penny. The local social worker warned Higgins that failure to provide proper care for his children would lead to punishment. After a month, Higgins took the children to the brick factory, but was met with the insistence of the orphanage officials that he pay 8 or 9 shillings weekly for their accommodation. On a rainy and stormy night in November, the children disappeared. Hugh Shields, a local miner, reported seeing Higgins walking with his children to the east, but later returned alone. Higgins asked him to accompany him to the social services office, where he claimed the children were fine and said they were on their way to Canada. Another miner, James Daly, confirmed seeing Higgins holding the older child's hand, and later found him alone at the social services office. Higgins told Daly that he had found a suitable home for the children and had taken a train to Edinburgh, where he met 2 women, one of whom offered to take one of the children. Higgins said that the children could not be separated. The other woman, upon learning that the children's mother was dead, agreed to take the second child. Higgins said he left the train in Ratho and returned to Winchurg to meet his drinking appointment. Daly noted that Higgins did not provide addresses for the women but gave his address. Another miner, Lillian Richards, also heard the same story from Higgins at the social services office. Richards said Higgins was calm and normal and raised no suspicions. Later, Higgins returned to the brick factory to sleep and told his colleague Alexander Fryan the story of the women on the train, but when Fryan asked him about the children, Higgins said they had gone to heaven. After several months, Mrs. Haynes was informed by Higgins that the children had drowned. The police collected evidence against Higgins meticulously. Several others corroborated the story of the women on the train, while others reported Higgins saying the children were at home or at school. A caretaker at the Dysart Orphanage identified the victims' shirts, confirming their stay at the orphanage. The police found a woman who had served Scottish to the children on one of the rainy and stormy nights in November 1911. Higgins was arrested within days of the bodies being found, and was caught off guard in the old inn in Broxton at 2 a.m. 4 police officers knocked on the inn's door, and the manager, who appeared to be new to the place and did not recognize Higgins, informed the police that an old worker, Higgins, was upstairs. When confronted with his children, Higgins said he did not know where they were and, when faced with the truth, had nothing to say. 3 months later, the trial took place in the High Court of Edinburgh, sparking widespread public debate, comparable only to the Oscar Slater case for years earlier. Higgins himself appeared the least affected in the courtroom, sitting silently before the audience without any expression, as if his life meant nothing. The defense did not attempt to challenge the identity of the children or their cause of death, but sought to deny Higgins' guilt, arguing that the accusation was based on assumptions and that someone else might have committed the crime. The defense later argued